Good morning. Welcome. It is a Monday morning. It's very busy here on Mondays. Mondays are the day that Grayson, my oldest son, does his lawns. He started a lawn business when he was 9 and he's now 17, so it's a pretty good business. And my husband works for him on Mondays as well. They do it together. And then my youngest son, Grant, who's 14, pitches in when needed. So I've got them off with breakfast this morning. They'll be coming back for lunch, and I realized that I was out of bread. So I wanted to see if I could get some loaves going and maybe have them done by the time they come back this afternoon for lunch. I was replenishing our granola bars because they took a bunch with them, and I wanted to make sure I had some when they got back. Now our granola bars, that's our strawberry granola bar recipe. It is the best recipe. We've been making it for years, and we always serve it when we have classes here at the Giles Frontier. You can find that on our website, and I'll put the link in this video to that as well. I'm going to make a honey whole wheat blend bread today. We're gonna make 2 loaves. The recipe makes 2 loaves, and we're gonna get that started. It's gonna need a proofing time we're gonna do. So the first thing is we're going to put in 1/3 cup of oil. Now you can use whatever oil you have on hand. I had some coconut oil, so I put that in there. We're also gonna put in 1/3 cup of honey. And a lot of my bread recipes use honey. You'll want to use, whatever honey that you have on hand. I have some honey that I buy that I use for bread baking because it's consistent in its thickness, if you will. And I was talking with my stepdad, who is a fabulous chef, makes bread all the time. And he was saying, it isn't recipes that are bad or wrong. It's how you make them. So find recipes that you want to give a try, and it might not work on the first time, and that's okay. So what you do is you work with the recipe. Work with it until you get it how you like it. And bread, I believe, is the same way. We're in the South, we're in Florida. We have high humidity and very hot days, very moist air. So sometimes my bread can turn out different from each time. And you also have to think about the amount of liquid in your recipe that it calls for. Sometimes I might have a tendency to put a little bit more flour in, and that's gonna alter the texture of my bread. And I wanted to share that about honey as well, because for me, my suggestion, we love mangrove honey. We're fortunate to live in Florida. We know a beekeeper that makes this mangrove honey. It is phenomenal. However, it has a higher liquid content than most honey does. It's a little bit on the watery side. So if I'm using this particular kind of honey, I'm going to have to be careful about the amount that I put in. So those are all little factors that can change the texture of your bread. Now, we are gonna put in, like I said, this is a blend. So I'm gonna put in 1 cup of all-purpose flour to start. And I just store flour in Rubbermaid containers. I have a very tiny pantry. Space is very limited in how I store things. So I have to be pretty organized in that manner. And then I'm gonna add 1 cup of whole wheat flour. I love using whole wheat flour, but I tend to use it a lot in a blended fashion by mixing it with the white flour. So we're gonna mix all these ingredients, plus we're gonna add in 2.5 cups of warm water. Oh, I see Grant left me a surprise. Fishing worms. That boy is fishing crazy right now, and I find these bits and pieces of worms all over the kitchen. Sometimes he even makes his own lures, and that's even more fascinating. I've got to post all about that. That is a mess in and of itself. Now, these quarantine days have been kind of fun and not so fun. I haven't necessarily been in the mood to do a lot of cleaning out because everywhere I want to take stuff is closed. I can't drop off our clothes or household goods. They're all closed. But what I did do yesterday, we got out into the yard. We have about a half acre here in the suburbs, and we have a lot of trees, a lot of moss, so we also have a lot of grapevine and unwanted things that grow. So we got out in the back and worked on a hedging area that was blocking my view of some woods and our lake. We got out there and really worked on that, got that all cut down. My lemon tree was being overtaken by grapevine. We found the lemon tree. I'm gonna get back out there and take care of that. But I also did a lot of pressure washing. And today I'm tired. So I should have thought about that on my busiest day, not doing something that would make me exhausted. Now, I don't know if you've pressure washed, but when I get out there and start doing stuff, I still think I'm in my 20s and maybe early 30s, but I'm not. And I am flat exhausted. So I pressure washed over at my mom's next door, all of her beds and rocks and paving stuff, and then I came over here and did the same in our front. Then I got in the back and I pressure washed the chicken coop and the sidewalk we have out there and the picnic table. I was in bed by 8, exhausted. And now I have to work all day long here in the kitchen. All right, so now that we've done that, I am going to take 2.5 tablespoons. Actually, let me check that. 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. I buy yeast in the big little containers. I put some in a jar and I put the rest in the freezer. If you're new to bread baking and you're not so sure about that and you don't want to invest in one of those big things, go buy the ones that are in the little packet. It's okay. If you're just getting started and want to give it a try, I don't want you investing a lot of money in things that you may or may not use. So start with those and then work up from there. So I'm going to do a tablespoon and I'm going to sprinkle it over the top. What we're going to do, and then another half. This is called proofing, where we're going to stir this and we're going to let it sit for about 15 minutes, and we are going to let this yeast wake up. We're going to wake it up, bring it to life, and let it know we are ready for it to work and make us some yummy bread for lunch. So I'm going to stir this in and let it sit here on the counter for about 15 minutes. And when we come back, what we're looking for is the top would be kind of bubbly and all yummy looking, and then we'll get started with our dough. Our mixture has risen up and it's nice and bubbly. And I'll show you right over here, nice and bubbly. We are gonna add in more of our flour now and salt. Now this is a blend, so we're gonna add 4 to 6 more cups of flour to this recipe. So I'm gonna mix it up. We're gonna start with 1 cup of our all-purpose flour. Okay, I'm gonna sprinkle that on. And then we'll add a cup of our wheat flour. I'm going to do the 2 cups at a time and stir it. Because again, we don't want to put too much flour and make our dough dry. And we also don't want too much liquid, or we're going to have a wet bread. And this goes back to texture. I made a little video for you about texture and showed you up close different textures and some breads that were a little too dry and a little too wet. So I'll pop that in between here so you can take a look at that. So just remember, don't give up on a recipe if it doesn't work the first time. If it's a recipe you really want to master, then work with it. Work with it until you find what works for you. Because where you live can have a big effect on how your food turns out. Even quick breads and things like that, especially here in Florida. And then if you add in elevation or very dry locations. So I'm gonna add in about a cup of the all-purpose, and then a half a cup of the wheat, and let's see where we're at. So that would be 3.5 cups that we've added in to our original proof. And I forgot salt. I need to add a teaspoon and a half of salt. Very important. There's a lot of recipes that I like making with you because it helps me to remember. I have been known to make banana-less banana bread before. But if I make it on camera with you, I'm more likely to get the banana in there. Okay, our dough is looking very nice. What we're looking for is for it pulling away from the sides. And it's doing that. We want to incorporate the flour that we have. Actually, I think it's quite nice. We've only added in 3.5 cups of flour. And it's not too sticky. You know, I think I'm going to add just a little bit more. Here we go again. But I'll tell you, the last time I made this recipe, it was too moist. You could eat it, certainly, and we did. That's what I just finished up yesterday. But it was just a little too moist, you know. Yeah, this is good. Okay, so it's pulled away from the sides. It's pulled away from the sides. When I touch it, it's not sticky. I can get my hands on here and it doesn't stick to my hands. So now we are going to put it out on a floured surface. Just a little bit because we don't want to add too much more in there. And we're going to knead it for 8 to 10 minutes or until I feel like it's good. We can do all of this with a mixer, and I use my stand mixer a lot of times for making bread. You can watch our honey whole wheat recipe. I'll put that in the link that I use my mixer for. But today I wanted to show you a really nice recipe doing kneading, even though I'm exhausted. You can probably see the circles under my eyes from my day of working yesterday. But there's something about kneading bread that just is calming and relaxing. And right now, everyone's out of my house. The big boys, I call them, my husband and Grayson are out mowing. Oh, I didn't put a thing under here. And Grant is out fishing and doing some raking at my mom's next door. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes and relax. Now, if you're just joining, I forgot to introduce myself if we have not met before. I'm Holly Giles, and I am the founder of the Giles Frontier and Modern Homestead Revival. And we've been sharing things with families for about 7 years now. Started off homeschooling my boys. I'm also a Florida master naturalist. I've always lived in Florida, a 4th generation. And that is my passion, is nature and all of the old Southern ways my grandmother taught me. Now, how she taught me to knead dough was to do a fold and push method. So I'm going to fold and then push with my hand. Turn, fold, push. You can do a little bit of a turn. So now I see it's getting a little sticky. So I'm going to add in some more flour on top. Okay? So I'm going to turn and fold. Turn, fold, push. Add a little bit more flour here. Turn, fold, push. Okay, so you don't want to watch me do this for 10 minutes. So I'll finish up this job and probably make another cup of coffee because I'm really tired. If I could get a nap today, that'd be awesome, but I don't think that's gonna happen. Those boys are gonna come in tired from mowing and be ready for lunch. And I haven't even thought about dinner, which I normally do by now, but I haven't. All right, so I'll meet you back here in a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about texture in our breads. I have 3 samples here for you. I have a whole wheat blend. This is just a very simple whole wheat recipe. I have our honey whole wheat right here. And then this is a potato bread. This is store-bought bread right here, but we're just using that to show texture. So the first one, this is our simple, basic whole wheat recipe, very simple recipe. It has beautiful texture. You can see the beautiful texture here. However, when I push down, you might notice that it's just a little bit too wet. You see, it's just a little bit too wet. So next time I work with this recipe, I have to be careful of my wet ingredients that I add. So obviously I added a little bit too much. We've used this loaf for bread for sandwiches this week, and it's great flavor, great taste, but really it's just a little bit too moist for us. Now, again, where you live has to do with the moisture in your bread. So finding a recipe that you like and working with it until you get it the way you want it is better than flopping from recipe to recipe, because a lot of times it's just your climate. We live in Florida. We have a lot of humidity here. That has a great effect on my baking, just as it would if you lived in a very dry climate or high humidity. Now let's take a look at the honey whole wheat recipe that is on our website. And again, this has beautiful texture. You can see the beautiful texture here. It's a little bit drier, so when I push down, it bounces back up. If you can see that, it bounces back up. And this has been a great bread. This one is a little bit older than this one, so it's getting a little dry, but this one turned out well. Now it's a little short. It did not have it didn't rise as high as I wanted it to. And that can have many factors of why it did that. But the flavor was great. We used it for sandwiches this week. We're obviously on the heel here. And I could have baked it, even a little bit longer. It's real light. And then now we're gonna look at the store-bought bread and its texture. Now I'm never gonna have store-bought bread texture. This is real light and fluffy. There's probably a lot of ingredients in here that I would not use in my home baking bread, but we're just using it as an example for texture purposes to see. Now for me, I think this one is great. Some people like a real tight texture. It just all depends on what you like. Now this particular one I'm gonna redo. You see my top caved in here a little bit. And what I have to do is put tinfoil over the top when I'm baking so it doesn't, I think that my oven is off on temperature and I don't want to burn the top. And what I did was I put the tinfoil on right away, and that caused some of that denting in the top. So next time I will wait a little while and let that rise up in the oven and bake before I put the tinfoil on. So these are a couple different textures that you're looking for when you're baking bread. You can test your bread. So when you make this recipe, if it didn't turn out the way that you liked, then just examine it. Examine the texture and think about, how long did I knead it? How long did I let it rise? Was the dough too sticky? Did it not bounce back, the dough, when I pushed my finger into it? And I made these on different days with 2 different recipes, and you can see the texture difference. And so those are some things to consider when you're baking your home bread, is experimenting with one recipe and really working the recipe and finding what works for you. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the texture that you just watched. So I am done kneading, and it's a beautiful, it feels good. There's just something about bread. Even if you've never made bread before, you'll love it. If you have kids, you can break it up and let them do it. Make small little loaves, make little mini loaves. Kids love making bread because it's kind of like Play-Doh that you can eat. Now, this turned out really nice. And when you push it, you see it bounces back. And that's what we're looking for when it's ready to rise. Okay? I am going to cut this into 2. You can break it apart with your hand if you want to. It's easy for me just to cut it, and I'm using a bread knife. You could use any knife. And now we're going to put it into loaf pans that I have greased with butter. Now you can use any size loaf pan. A lot of times I use the smaller ones. They're going to form to whatever size. So you can see that mine are 2 different sizes because that's what I have clean in the cabinet. And I've buttered both of them. And this particular recipe, a lot of my recipes, some, you roll it out and then roll it in. This one isn't. It just wants you to form it to the pan. So I'm just going to plop it in the pan. And sometimes I might push it around and get it in there. And I don't even think you have to do that. So that's one. And then this one. Plop it in. Now this one obviously is a bigger pan, and I'll push this one around just so when it rises it heads to the edges. Now we are going to set this aside. I'm going to go set it over on top of the stove. I'm going to cover it with a dish towel, and I'm going to let it rise at least an hour. You could let it rise longer if you wanted to. The longer you let it rise, it'll come up, and I've accidentally left mine for a couple hours before and they rose up pretty high. And then we'll bake them in the oven, and we'll talk about that when we come back and check on the rise. It's been a little more than an hour, maybe about an hour and a half, and these did not really rise like I wanted them to. And I'm not quite sure why, but I'm gonna bake them anyway because I'm sure they're gonna bake up wonderful. Now, I always try to make more than 2 loaves at a time because we go through bread a lot in a week with a bunch of boys running around. So I've already got some in the back in process. So when I bake all of them, I'm gonna go ahead and stick these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. And see what happens. They might rise up more in the oven and be perfect. So I'm gonna do the other 2 in smaller loaf pans, and when they're all done, we'll bring them back and examine them, open them up, and see how the texture turned out. Now, while you wait, I'll share some of what we got into yesterday that made me so tired today. It's been a little more than an hour, maybe about an hour and a half, and these did not really rise like I wanted them to, and I'm not quite sure why, but I'm gonna bake them anyway because I'm sure they're gonna bake up wonderful. Now, I always try to make more than 2 loaves at a time because we go through bread a lot in a week with a bunch of boys running around. So I've already got some in the back in process. So when I bake all of them, I'm going to go ahead and stick these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes and see what happens. They might rise up more in the oven and be perfect. So I'm going to do the other two in smaller loaf pans, and when they're all done, we'll bring them back and examine them, open them up, and see how the texture turned out. Now, while you wait, I'll share some of what we got into yesterday that made me so tired today. Okay, so today, you gotta get down where you can see. Today is a work day on our southern homestead here. We always have work to be done. We're gonna do some pressure washing, leaf raking, general cleanup at the lake before the boys run off and do their own thing. So let's see how it goes.
I need to be working on trucks, what I need to be doing.
Here down in the side of our property, I have a lemon tree, which has been overtaken during the summertime with grapevine. So we're using, some tools out here, some electric tools, but we're gonna have to do this one by hand because when grapevine starts overtaking, it gets into the branches and woven around, and I already have baby lemons coming on and I don't wanna harm them. So we're gonna go ahead and do this by hand. See, that's what happens right there. Okay, canoe and tire, and then come up here to the little shed house, and then Grayson, you're done. You gotta come up here and we're gonna clean this out, and then you're done, and Grant's gonna supervise me pressure washing.
What's Grayson you've done? Grant, help me.
You said you want to be done.
Yeah.
So go get the canoe. Don't throw rocks at my camera.
Alright.
Go get the canoe.
Hey, I'm being serious about python hunting.
What do you mean python hunting?
Hey,
You don't even know how to get a python. They can kill you, Grayson.
all you gotta do is grab their tail, pull them out of the hole, and shoot them. You don't have to wrestle them like they do with that show.
You're just gonna go grab a python tail.
Mom,
I don't think that's how it works.
Seriously, get like $20 a foot.
You can also get strangled. Don't they strangle you?
Not if I strangle him first.
Why is somebody's shirt out here?
Colby.
Colby's shirt. Any critters?
No.
Any duck eggs? Any nests?
Except for ants.
Is this the one that's got fiberglass bits?
No, this is. Remember I bought this one for like $50. It had a title, but I lost the title. Remember?
No, the title's in the house.
Is there? Okay.
We should really put a porch out here. This faces the lake. We really should put a porch here. This is where we need a screen porch. Look at the lake. Okay, hey, can we get rid of the headless deer over here?
What am I supposed to do?
Well, can you put it somewhere?
No.
Grayson, it just doesn't look good. It's kind of scary.
That's what I shoot, Mama.
But you're not shooting now. No, but it doesn't look good. Put it down. What's this weight over here? Right
Anchor.
here. Huh?
Anchor.
For what?
Boat.
Why is it right there? Get it out of the yard.
Thank you.
Get it out of the yard. Okay, what else is down here? Grant, get this rope. Can you get this rope? Yeah.
cheese truck. Woo-wee.
All right, so here we have it. We got it all cleaned up. For the most part, we have some to haul away. I can see the woods over there. My lemon tree is uncovered. I love it. We are full of lemons on here. And in Florida, you can be overtaken by grapevine really quickly. And when you've had a busy season like us, getting out in the back, way back down here, doesn't happen so often, maybe once a year. But I love to see the woods over here. And next project, we'll get at some of these trees so we can see the lake better. It's getting hot out here in Florida. We're still cleaning out and the boys are not happy, so I'm trying to get it all done so they can go do what they want to do. We are back with the finished product of our honey whole wheat blend sandwich bread. Now, remember I told you that our first loaves were a little short and they didn't rise very well. And you can see that here. It's a little short compared to this loaf right here. There's a little bit of a difference. Our second loaves turned out beautiful, perfect, great sandwich size. Our first loaves are a little short and the texture is a little moist, as you can see. Now, there could be two reasons. I wanted to show you both examples because every time you make bread, it can be different, even when using the same recipe. Now, the first one that we did together, I did by hand. It's possible that I had too much liquid. It's possible that I didn't knead it enough, or I kneaded it too much. There's different factors. This one, after I was trying to feed the boys when they came home, obviously we didn't make it to show you the loaves where we got them. I got the mixer out and I kneaded this one with the mixer. I did everything else by hand, then I threw it in the mixer to do the kneading for me because I was short on time. And this one turned out really nice. And obviously they've already eaten half the loaf today. So those are our two samples of bread from the same recipe and how you can make them every time and they turn out different. So don't be afraid of the recipe. Work with it and see how you can change it. The texture on this one is perfect. It's got a nice texture, a tight texture. It's good sandwich bread. We've been using it today, obviously. And then we have a second one for the rest of the week. Now, even though this one did not turn out, it makes good toast in the morning. It might make a real good grilled cheese. So it's definitely usable. Just because they don't rise as high doesn't mean we're not gonna use the bread. Generally, I would try to make 2 recipes, which would give me 4 loaves of bread. I would put at least 2 in the freezer. Around here, 1 loaf could be lunch. So you never know how that goes. But give this recipe a try. Experiment with it. Remember the factors of where you live, the temperature, the humidity factors into your recipes. So don't give up on a recipe on the first try. Try, and try again. Hope you enjoy making your own honey wheat blend sandwich bread.